Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 33 of Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, day 33 on the second canto. And we're in the last chapter, chapter 10, and we're starting today from verse 23, which is it's part of a lengthy section dealing with Garbhodakshay Vishnu and him manifesting the material world. So let us begin by chanting our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu-Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatrulibhyas cha kripa sindhubhya eva cha Paditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. All right then, so chapter 10 verse, second canto chapter 10 verse 23, here's the verse. When there was a desire to perceive the physical characteristics of matter, such as softness, hardness, warmth, cold, lightness and heaviness, the background of sensation, the skin pores, the hairs on the body, and their controlling deities, the trees, were generated. Within and outside the skin is a covering of air, through which sense perception became prominent. Yes, well, this is all very profound. Yes, the manifestation of the different facets, you could say, of the material world, all as part of the creation by Garbhodakshay Vishnu, which means the sarga, the first creation, initial creation by the Lord, and then later there's the secondary creation by Lord Brahma, when he takes all these different things and puts them together in functional ways in the actual manifest creations for life to go on in the material world. So here now, Srila Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, the physical characteristics of matter, such as softness, are subjects of sense perception, and thus physical knowledge is the subject matter of the touch sensation. So yes, Prabhupada points out, you can measure the temperature of matter by touching it with the hand. You can estimate the weight of something by lifting it with the hand. He says, the skin pores and the hairs on the body are all interdependent with the touch sensation. So, sense perception is a source of knowledge. So it's suggested here that physical or physiological knowledge, Prabhupada says, is subordinate to the knowledge of the self. And Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, knowledge of self can expand to the knowledge of phenomena, but physical knowledge cannot lead to knowledge of the self. That's interesting, isn't it? Knowledge of the self can be expanded to include knowledge of phenomena within this world. But physical knowledge as such cannot lead to knowledge of the self. And then there's a short second paragraph. Prabhupada makes very interesting and important point. There's an intimate relationship between the hairs on the body and vegetation on the body of the earth. Vegetables are nourishment for the skin, as food, of course, and as medicine. Yes. All right, so on to verse 24. Thereafter, when the Supreme Person desired to perform varieties of work, the two hands in their controlling strength and Indra, the demigod in heaven, became manifested, as also the acts dependent on both the hands and the demigod. Okay, this is all very interesting, how this material creation got put together, and in other words, how we function. So Prabhupada says that in all these different examples, every item, we can note with profit that the sense organs are never independent. The Lord is also known as Rishikesh, Lord of the senses. So the sense organs are controlled. The sense organs are controlled by a particular type of demigod. So therefore, obviously, the demigods are servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So therefore, none of us can claim proprietorship of our senses, at least meaning the senses which we're endowed with currently. Yes, for a while. Currently we have these senses, but don't worry, after some years we will not have these senses any longer. So, yes, so there's control by the demigods control of the senses, and demigods are servants of the Supreme Lord. So within the material world there's no independence either of the actual material nature or of the living entity. But as long as a living entity continues to be puffed up by his or her tiny existence, it should be understood that he's under the control of Maya, the external energy. And so therefore, there's no question of liberation from Maya. However much one may declare oneself to be independent. Yes, it's sort of typical of material existence. So verse 25, thereupon, because of his desiring to control movement, his legs became manifested, and from the legs the controlling deity named Vishnu was generated. By his personal supervision of this act, all varieties of human being are busily engaged in dutiful occupational sacrifice. Well, that's on a good day, you could say. They're engaged in dutiful occupational sacrifice. Otherwise, one way or the other, they're engaged. They're definitely engaged. But so many of them thinking that they're independent and trying to independently do things just for their satisfaction. So there's a fairly extensive purport here. Prabhupada makes the point every human is engaged in his occupational duty, which can mean any sort of work, really. And these activities are visible. We see it's going on. It's all going on. I mean, so much. And the problem is, though, they don't know how to make these activities purposeful to fulfill the mission of human life, which is to go back to Godhead. In fact, they just do them in ways which, not that they're exactly wanting it like that, but they cause their deeper entanglement materially. And as Prabhupada says, unknowingly entering into the deep regions of darkness. What a shame. Yeah. So the scientist, the artist, the engineer, the technician, they all have their engagements, but they should be engaged for furthering Krishna consciousness. Okay, second paragraph. So the living entities here have been captivated by the external energy for a long time, completely forgotten the Lord. And therefore there's just an assumption, it's taken for granted that this life is all in all for enjoying the maximum sense gratification. Just such a shame. But this wrong conception can't give you peace of mind. Therefore we see so vividly, no one is really happy on the material level. So what they need to do, the Prabhupada says, the secret is that at every step they have to perform sacrifices for world peace. World peace can only come from engaging in Krishna consciousness. Yes. And Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita 18:45 and 46, which explains about that, how you can attain the highest perfection by discharging your occupational duty for the Supreme Lord. Yes. And then there's a third paragraph, that everyone has their particular individual propensities and abilities. There's nothing wrong with that. But everyone must understand, first of all, we're not absolutely independent as they foolishly think we are. Rather, we're under the control of the Lord and His agencies. Yeah. So knowing this, one should perform one's work. Prabhupada says, make it a point that by his work and the result of his work, the Lord is satisfied, or he serves the Lord as prescribed by Shastra authoritative descriptions. So in this regard then, as the verse itself is focusing, the duties of the legs are the most important instrument, because without the help of the legs you can't move from one place to another. So therefore Prabhupada makes the point at the end of the purport, therefore the Lord has special control over the legs of all human beings, which are meant for performing yajnas. And on to verse 26. Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals. And thus there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati. The object of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Oh, Krishna. This is very interesting, isn't it? Of course, sexual pleasure is such an extremely prominent factor in material life. And Prabhupada makes the point at the beginning of the purport that for the conditioned souls, the highest pleasure is sense pleasure, is sexual pleasure. and woman is the object. And both of them, the sense perception of sexual pleasure and the woman are controlled by the Prajapati. Prajapati meaning progenitor of living beings. And the Prajapati is under the control of the Lord's genitals. Yeah, well, very explicit, but very important aspect of life. And Prabhupada makes the point that this proves that the Lord is not impersonal because he has genitals. And Prabhupada makes a very interesting point. No one would take the trouble to maintain children if there was no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. Yeah. So, we do know that the people, not just the people, the animals, this is going on universally in the material world, that the pleasure of sex life is so extremely prominent, and so many people think that's what life here is for. But actually the material world is for going back to Godhead. And of course generations of people are needed for doing that. Yes. Prabhupada once was on a morning walk and a devotee asked Prabhupada that Prabhupada was emphasizing that we must distribute Krishna consciousness far and wide and just on an immense scale. We really have to do that. And one devotee sort of, you could even say protested, you might say, that if we keep doing this, if everybody goes back to Godhead, there'll be no more human race. And Prabhupada said, yes, that is our goal. No more human race. But then Prabhupada added, but don't worry, there's always going to be plenty of fools and rascals. We're not going to go back to Godhead, at least for the time being. So, in the human form, sex life can be there for the service of the Lord. And even the Lord says that such sex life is a form of Him. Kamosmi, He says, that lust is me. That desire for sex pleasure is me. So yeah, in the human form, these things can be done for spiritual progress and the spiritual development of the human race. But when we look at the animals, we see it's only done for sex pleasure. Yes, they have no motive for serving the Lord at all. Yeah, that's different from the humans. So Prabhupada then goes on to make the point that if one wants and if one's able, one can have hundreds of children if he can produce children for devotional service. Otherwise, if not, Prabhupada says, it is on the level of the pigs. Sure. How's that, devotees? That's pretty much to the point. And then Prabhupada also makes the point that the swine, the pigs, are much more expert than us humans because they can have a whole lot of piglets at one time, a dozen piglets at one time, whereas humans can generally only have one. Sometimes two, it's not that common. 3 becomes really uncommon. And there's just one amongst hundreds or even a few thousand devotee families in South Africa. There's one family only. They have quadruplets, and all four are devotees. But that's just one family out of really a lot. So, yes. So, therefore, the householders, though, who are going to be engaged in this, they have to remember that this is for devotional service. Otherwise, they're just going to get caught up on the material level. So, Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, perception of sexual pleasure is there, even in the body of the dog, but there's no sense of God consciousness. The human form of life is distinct from that of the dog by the perception of God consciousness. Okay. Verse 27. Thereafter, when he desired to evacuate the refuse of eatables, the evacuating hole, the anus, and the sensory organ thereof, developed along with the controlling deity, Mitra. The sensory organ and the evacuating substance are both under the shelter of the controlling deity, Mitra. So Prabhupada gives one sentence purport. Even in the matter of evacuating stool, the refuse is controlled. So how can the living entity claim to be independent? How's that for a good point? Okay, verse 28. Thereafter, when he desired to move from one body to another, the navel and the air of departure and death were combinedly created. The navel is the shelter for both, namely death and the separating force. Isn't that interesting? Really. So Srila Prabhupada explains that the prana vayu continues life, and apana vayu stops the living force. Yes, and both vibrations are generated from the navel. So it's the Prabhupada makes the point, Lord Brahma was born of the abdominal hole of Garbhodakshai Vishnu, means the navel, or sometimes in English it's called the tummy button. Yes, as a separate body, and the same principle is followed even in the birth of any ordinary body. Yes. So the child's body then develops from the mother's, that's while the child is within the womb, and is separated by cutting the navel joint, or as we say, the umbilical cord. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, and that is the way the Supreme Lord manifested himself as many, as separated many. The living entities are therefore separated parts, and thus they have no independence. Verse 29. When there was a desire to have food and drink, the abdomen and the intestines, and also the arteries, became manifested. The rivers and seas are the source of their sustenance and metabolism. So interesting. Prabhupada explains the controlling deities of the intestines are the rivers, and those of the arteries means the main blood conducting organs, passages. So the controlling deities are the seas, and fulfilling or filling the belly with food and drink facilitates the continuation of life. Yes. And metabolism of the food and drink replaces waste of the bodily energies. Therefore, the body's health depends on the healthy actions of the intestines and arteries. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the rivers and the seas, being the controlling deities of the two, keep the intestines and the arteries in healthy order. Verse 30. When there was a desire to think about the activities of his own energy, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the moon, determination and all desire became manifested. Right, so the heart, or the region of the heart, is the seat of the supersoul, and without him, the living entity can't get into working according to one's previous deeds. Yes, so when one leaves the body and goes into the next body, the next life, and the supersoul goes with you, and the supersoul arranges that you can then remember what you did in your previous life, and it becomes a real impetus for doing basically the same things. So the living entities in the material world, they are manifest in life in terms of desires and suitable bodies offered by the material nature under the direction of the supersoul. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 10, Maya jakshena prakriti suyate sa charam. Hopefully you know that verse. Krishna says the material nature is working under my direction. Yes. So when the supersoul is there, the mind, suitable mind, manifests, and one becomes conscious of one's occupation. Prabhupada says, just as when one wakes up from sleeping, so the mind, our minds, develop when the supersoul sits in our hearts, after which the mind, the controlling deity of whom is the moon, and the activities of the mind, thinking, feeling, and willing, they all take place. There you go. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the activities of the mind cannot begin without the manifestation of the heart. And the heart becomes manifested when the Lord wants to see the activities of the material creation. Verse 31, the 7 elements of the body, namely the thin layer on the skin itself, the flesh, blood, fat, marrow, and bone, are all made of earth, water, and fire, whereas the life air is produced by the sky, water, and air. So Prabhupada makes the point at the beginning of the paragraph that the construction of things, the construction of the whole material world, is prominently made by 3 main elements, earth, water, and fire. But the living force, let's not misunderstand this, at least in material terms, the living force is produced by sky, air, and water. So water is the common element in both the gross and subtle forms of material creation. And breathing is so important. So the body's mainly earth, water, and fire, but breathing is produced of sky, air, and water. So therefore, open air, regular bath, and ample space to live are important for a healthy life. You get that? Yeah. You know, health is such a prominent thing these days. Yeah. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by also addressing this type of point. Fresh produce from earth, grains, vegetables, plus fresh water and heat are good for the gross body, for the upkeep of the gross body. And fresh produce, Prabhupada says. When Prabhupada first arrived in America, he saw a phenomenon which hadn't appeared yet in India, although I'm sure it's there, at least in the cities. It's called frozen vegetables. And Prabhupada thought that this is a very good idea. So he got some. But then he found out that these frozen vegetables have lost their vitality. So they can't. When it comes to real upkeep of the body, they're not really very good for that. All right, so verse 32. The sense organs are attached to the modes of material nature, and the modes of material nature are products of the false ego. The mind is subjected to all kinds of material experiences of happiness and distress, and intelligence is the feature of the mind's deliberation. So anyway, in this material world, the living entity, illusioned by the material nature, identifies with the false ego, which Prabhupada clarifies just immediately after stating that when the living entity is caught up in the material body, he at once identifies with the bodily relationships, forgetting his own identity as spirit soul. So this false ego is associated with the modes. And because of that, because the senses are functioning in terms of the false ego, therefore the senses also become attached to the modes. Important point, the mind is the instrument for feeling different material experiences, but the intelligence, of course, is higher. It's deliberative and can change everything for the better, can manipulate the situation for the better. So therefore the intelligent person is able to even get salvation by the use of intelligence. The intelligence is able to detect what is my situation, what is that situation, some other situation, what situation may be better for me, and then make some arrangement for one to function according to a better situation. Yes. The intelligence can inquire, who am I? And having decided or understood who I am, can then carry out activities of life in terms of what I actually am, which is eternal spirit soul, eternal servant of Krishna. Why am I suffering? The intelligence can understand how to get rid of suffering and take to self-realization. The intelligence is so extremely valuable. So therefore it's advised that intelligent people associate with advanced devotees, sages and saints, who are already on the path and who are further along on the path. And when you get that good association, you get good instruction. And in this way, you can slacken your attachments for material life or give them up altogether. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, thus the intelligent man gradually gets rid of the illusion of matter and false ego and is promoted to the real life of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. So on to verse 33. Thus, by all this, the external feature of the personality of Godhead is covered by gross forms, such as those of planets, which were explained to you by me. So anyway, in this way, the separated material energy of the Lord is covered by 8 coverings: earth, water, fire, air, ether, or sky, mind, intelligence, false ego. They're all emanated from the Lord as his separated external energy. So therefore they're just like clouds covering the sun. The cloud is a creation of the sun, but it covers the eyes so we can't see the sun. But the good news is that in regard to clouds extend for some distance into the sky. But then, you may have had that experience when flying, that down on the ground it may be horrible weather and completely covered by clouds and rain. But when you take off and after a little while you break through the clouds, suddenly you're in complete sunlight. It's such a total change. It's amazing. Yeah. So anyway, the conditioned souls are covered by Maya, and the Lord reserves the right not to be exposed to their eyes. So just like the sun can't be covered, really, not really like completely obscured, so the Lord also can't be covered. But the problem is that when the sun is covered, when there's clouds, we can't see the sun. The problem is that the sun is not exposed to our eyes. Not that the sun is not there or the sun's gone away. So similarly, the Lord reserves the right not to be exposed to our eyes. But the unfortunate conditioned souls who have no eyes of transcendental vision and can't see the Lord, Prabhupada says, well then they say he doesn't exist, the Lord doesn't exist. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the covering of the gigantic material feature is accepted by such men with a poor fund of knowledge, and how this is so is explained in the following verse 34. Therefore, beyond this gross manifestation is a transcendental manifestation, finer than the finest form. It has no beginning, no intermediate stage, and no end. Therefore, it is beyond the limits of expression or mental speculation, and is distinct from the material conception. So Prabhupada explains the gross external body of the Lord is manifest at certain times only. So it's not the eternal feature or eternal form of the Lord. That gross external body has a beginning, middle, and end, and therefore it's material. So, but we can understand the material world is begun from the Lord. So therefore the form of the Lord is from before the beginning of the material world. And the actual form of the Lord is certainly transcendental to the finest or any fine material conception. So, but all Prabhupada goes on to explain that all 8 of these coverings, earth, water, fire, etc., they're outer coverings of the absolute truth. And the absolute truth is therefore, Prabhupada says, beyond expression, beyond comprehension of material conception. He is nirvisheshanam, transcendental to all material conceptions. So, but we must understand this term, nirvisheshanam. Nirvisheshanam doesn't mean that there are no qualities at all. It means, it doesn't mean there's no transcendental qualification. We mustn't think that. So then Prabhupada refers to another verse, another word from the verse, visheshanam. Visheshanam means qualities, or particularly material qualities. So when nir is added to it and you get nirvisheshanam, we're all familiar with that term from Prabhupada's second pranam mantra, nirvishesha, shunyavadi. So when it's said he is nirvisheshanam, doesn't mean he doesn't have any qualities. It means he's transcendental to all material conceptions. I mean, visheshanam, nirvisheshanam means no material qualities, no material variegatedness. And Prabhupada explains this nullifying expression is described in 4 transcendental qualifications, namely unmanifested, transcendental, eternal, and beyond the conception of mind or word. So beyond words means negation of the material conception. So therefore, unless one is transcendentally situated, one cannot know the transcendental form of the Lord. Verse 35. Neither of the above forms of the Lord, as just described unto you from the material angle of vision, is accepted by the pure devotees of the Lord who know him well. So Prabhupada explains, the impersonalists think of the Lord in 2 different ways. One way is they worship him as Vishvarupa, or the universal form. The other is they worship him in some unmanifest, indescribable, subtle form. So, in other words, either pantheism or monism. That's the point. Vishvarupa, universal form, means pantheism. Everything is a manifestation and therefore is very intimately related with the Lord. Monism, of course, we all know. It's all one, impersonalism. But the devotees reject both, pantheism and monism, because they know the actual situation. So this is all described in the 11th canto. In the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, verse 45, which Prabhupada quotes there. Then the second paragraph. So Arjuna's a pure devotee, of course. So after a while, he asked the Lord to show his 4-handed form and then 2-armed form, because he wasn't happy seeing the universal form. Therefore, devotees don't worship the universal form. They worship forms in the spiritual world, forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yes, non-devotees worship imaginary material forms, the universal form, and then may merge, then the worship stops. But pure devotees worship the Supreme Lord in the beginning and in the stage of salvation. It's eternal. So therefore the worship of the devotees, particularly the pure devotees, never stops. Whereas the worship of the impersonalist stops after he attains salvation. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore the pure devotees of the Lord are described here as vipaschita, or the learned, who are in the knowledge of the Lord perfectly. So verse 36, he, the personality of Godhead, manifests himself in a transcendental form, being the subject of his transcendental name, quality, pastimes, entourage, and transcendental variegatedness. Although he is unaffected by all such activities, he appears to be so engaged. So Prabhupada explains that whenever there's a need for material creation, the Lord accepts forms in the material world for creation, maintenance, and distraction. Particularly that's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. It's all to do with the material creation. So it's not that he wants any material fruit of results or fruit of success from having his incarnations which appear in the material world. Because he, of course, he is actually full in all opulences. So he has nothing to strive for, particularly kind of stupid material things. So therefore an intelligent person who can distinguish between his transcendental activities and the activities of the conditioned souls, such a person is not bound by the reactions of activities. Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita 4:14, which makes the point that the Lord is never affected by the activities that he seems to perform in his different incarnations and manifestations. And he certainly doesn't have any desire to achieve success materially. So therefore the intelligent person who can distinguish between the transcendental activities of the Lord and the activities of the conditioned soul is not bound by the reactions of work. So the Lord himself, as Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva, conducts the three modes. From Vishnu, Brahma is born, and from Brahma, Shiva is born. And sometimes Lord Brahma is Vishnu himself. So Prabhupada concludes the purport, thus Brahma creates the different species of life all over the universe, which means that the Lord creates the whole manifestation, either by himself or through the agency of his authorized deputies. Well, okay, so now we go on to a pretty substantial thing. Verses 37 to 40 together. It's very instructive. O King, know from me that all living entities are created by the Supreme Lord according to their past deeds. This includes Brahma and his sons like Daksha, the periodical heads like Vaivasvata Manu, the demigods like Indra, Chandra, and Varuna, the great sages like Bhrigu, Vyas, and Vashishta, the inhabitants of Pitriloka and Siddhaloka, the Charanas, Gandharvas, Vidyadharas, Asuras, Yakshas, Kinnaras, and angels, the serpentines, the monkey-shaped Kimpurushas, the human beings, the inhabitants of Matriloka, the demons, Pishachas, ghosts, spirits, lunatics and evil spirits, the good and evil stars, the goblins, the animals in the forest, the birds, the household animals, the reptiles, the mountains, the moving and standing living entities, the living entities born from embryos, from eggs, from perspiration, and from seeds, and all others, whether they be in the water, land, or sky, in happiness, in distress, or in mixed happiness and distress. All of them, according to their past deeds, are created by the Supreme Lord. That was quite something. Okay, let's have a look at the purport. So this whole list, without exception, Prabhupada says, they're created by the Almighty Lord Vishnu. And they occupy from the highest planet down to the lowest planet. So therefore, what's the point? Point is that ultimately, none of them, however, whatever their different features, abilities, characteristics, good or bad points, whatever that may be, they're all created by the Lord. They're not independent from him. And of course, it's confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14.4 that all the living entities are the Lord's offspring. Second paragraph, at least after the Sanskrit of that 14.4 from Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada says the material nature is compared to the Father. And although, and of course it applies in material life, although birth is from the mother, she is not the ultimate cause of birth. The Father is. Without his seed, no mother can give birth. And so therefore all living entities are born from seeds of Krishna. And only to a fool do they appear to be born from material nature as such. So on to paragraph 3. The material nature is compared, the material nature is one of the energies of the Lord. This is referred to in Bhagavad Gita chapter 7 verse 4. But the thing is, it's inferior in comparison to the living entities. For them, the material nature is inferior in comparison to the living entities. The living entities are the superior nature. And Prabhupada says the superior nature and inferior nature of the Lord combine to manifest all universal affairs. Verse 41. There's one further paragraph in this purport of verse 40. So some of the living entities are relatively more happy, Prabhupada says, in material life, or just relatively happy. Relatively. Not that much. Not that much. But relatively happy in material life. Others, and there are many of them, are distressed. But the point is that even those who are relatively happy, none of them are just truly happy. It's just not like that. Yeah. Like Prabhupada gives the example, if you're put in prison, no one can be happy in a prison. Whether you're first class prisoner, second class, or what to speak of third class. But still, to be promoted from third class to first class prisoner, it's not good, because you need to be released altogether. And Prabhupada makes interesting point. Right now, you may have been, if you're a prisoner, you may have been promoted to being a first-class prisoner and have the facilities. But then later, you'll probably be degraded to a third-class prisoner again. So what you have to do is try to become free and go back to Godhead. That's the real goal for everyone. All right, let's have a look here. Let's do one more verse. Let's do verse 41. According to the different modes of material nature, the mode of goodness, the mode of passion, and the mode of darkness, there are different living creatures who are known as demigods, human beings, and hellish living entities. O King, even a particular mode of nature, being mixed with the other two, is divided into three. And thus each kind of living creature is influenced by the other modes and acquires its habits also. So that's an interesting and important point about life in the material world. Generally, living entities, humans too, they have one main mode, a particular person or living being, one main mode, but they will be conducted to some degree by one or both of the other two modes, and sooner or later, even if now they're mainly in one particular mode, sooner or later they will be dragged out of it, not just influenced, but another mode will become their main mode. So generally, for the conditioned souls now, generally they're more influenced by passion because they want to lord it over the material world and enjoy. But if you get good association, you can come to goodness, and even more than goodness. But if you get bad association, then you develop ignorance. So all these things can be changed by association. In fact, if you get association with devotees, then you can come to the transcendental platform. So anyway, one has to be able to distinguish between good and bad. Yes. So the best, of course, is association of devotees. Not bad association. He had bad association with the prostitute, but then later got good association and became a devotee. Yes. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, to associate with persons engaged in lording it over the material world means to enter into the darkest region of hell. One should try to raise himself by the association of the great soul. That is the way of the perfection of life. So there you go, devotees. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.